arguably the best coach in college football right now, Kirby Smart, coming out today and coming out with some massive statements. Kirby was basically asked a question about the upcoming April 7th litigation that can be coming down with the House case, so this affects Big Ten and college football just in general, or SEC, everybody. But Kirby Smart came out and said, look, we might have a little bit of understanding of what's going to happen on April the 7th. The problem that we have right now is that I'm being reached out to by agents to go on a Zoom call so that I can start cherry picking guys that I potentially would want in the portal. Stop, pause, hold on. Wait a minute. Stop. What? Like, what did you just say?
Right.
You mean to tell me that Kirby Smart just said that agents are calling him and saying, hey, I have a list full of guys that I represent, and these guys will shop to be in the portal, and nobody's doing anything about that? That is ridiculous. And why would Kirby lie? Kirby ain't lying.
No, he's not. You and I are privy to what goes on behind closed doors. And I speak to agents, you speak to agents. I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these movements that happen when kids do decide to enter the transfer portal, it's because their agents have reached out to schools and they've already started the communication. If they don't think that it's worth their player entering the portal, they'll stay, they'll get a bump in pay or whatever they're getting, and they'll stick around. But if they put their name out there and the school that they're currently at can't match it, that player enters the portal and then they go to the highest bidder for the most part. That is what the current process is. I think it's crazy that it's kind of lazy that these agents are just throwing together a Zoom call saying like, all right, just tell me which dudes you want and we're going to make it happen. That to me is really stupid, but it is insane to like really put into context here of how unregulated this is. That wouldn't happen in the professional leagues. None of that would happen in any professional league.
I'm not going to go that far. I do think that Scott Boras would tell any team, for what it's worth, like, hey, my guy's not going to re-up with like his organization.
But they're not doing a Zoom call going like, okay, guys, here's my list.
Correct.
Just point at them and tell me which ones you want.
I mean, he would probably tell GMs like, hey, he doesn't want to go back there. He really wants to go here.
Right.
And I'm sure he would tell teams like, hey, like, I'll give an example. Like the Juan Soto deal in New York this past year. He's like, I want to stay in New York. Well, he stays with the Mets. He stays in New York, but it's just a different team. I bring that up to say this. How in the good – see, here's the part. So Kirby Smart laid out a couple of things here. Number one, he brought up the simple nature of, listen, guys, here's the truth. We're going to pay TV revenue share to players this year. We know that we're going to do that. Now, number one, we have absolutely no idea what it's going to look like. Now, we might talk about this at the end if we have time. But Dan Wenzel, now of ESPN, which is so weird to say, Dan Wenzel of ESPN. But Dan Wenzel brought it up today in an article, which was a great read, by the way, of basically in part saying that, like, hey, man, we want regulation and these big conferences, Big Ten, SEC want regulation. Joe, what, like, I got to stop and just ask the general question. The SEC and the Big Ten both have regulation over tampering. 100%. You cannot talk to an agent about another player at another school to make them to come to your school. That is against the rules. We talk about we need regulation all the time. I have been screaming from the rafters on this show and on Twitter and everywhere. Why in the world wouldn't the SEC and the Big Ten go after these guys or these agents and say, listen, you better stop or we're going to give you a cease and desist. We're going to tell players not to be represented by you. If the NCAA doesn't want to do anything about tampering, and Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti are all like, hey, we want regulation. Joe, I got to call it like I see it. I call bullshit that they want regulation. There's literally laws in place in the SEC where tampering is illegal. The same with the Big Ten. It is legally not right by the bylaws of the conference for you to tamper. if you want to be a part of that conference as a player or a team that's in the conference or in the Big Ten or the SEC, they can come down with legislation. They can say, no, you are going to sit out. We're not going to allow you to do that. And hey, guess what?
But they but they don't do it though. That's where I'm kind of confused by this conversation.
That's why I literally just said, that's why I call bullshit when they come out here and say they want legislation. No, they don't. No, they do not. Because they could easily, Joe, could you imagine? They already have this somewhat in place. Like, as an example, the Big Ten and the SEC, if a player went in the spring portal, let's say I go to Ohio State and I wanted to go to Penn State because Jim Knowles went there. Like, hey, man, I tried to stick it out here at Ohio State. I didn't want to do it, but I want to go to Penn State now. The Big Ten would make me sit out a year if I transferred to Penn State. I can't now in the spring portal. I cannot go inside conferences. So why is that upheld? And then now you have a situation where the SEC does the same thing. Why aren't they going after this? This is what I'm saying. They could go after this. I feel like they're deciding not to.
They can't go after it because if one school calls out another school, then somebody else is going to call out that. Like, everybody's doing it, so there's nobody that's going to fall on the sword to become the example. Everybody's afraid to tattle on one another because nobody is without sin in this situation. Everybody is making these mistakes. I think, though, part of this conversation that's being missed, a lot of the tampering occurs is initiated by agents, and that was what was brought up by Kirby.
But that's
a lot of these people. I know that it is. But it's not. I think that what a lot of people just immediately assume when you hear tampering is that a coach sends a DM to a player and says, let's talk. You need to enter the portal. We want you to come play for us. It's not that simple. It is a communication between an agent and institutions to determine and to see if they can get an opportunity for their player to transfer somewhere else before they go in the portal, or they just jump in the portal and then see and wait for any offers that come. So I think that is where the regulation needs to happen. It needs to be more regulation on what the agents are doing. And I thought that what Dan's article highlighted, and I thought that was really interesting that he talked about or got the perspective of others about in that article, was basically a lot of the problems that we have at the current moment are impossible to regulate. Now that you have made it okay for interactions between boosters and players when it wasn't supposed to occur in the past, you now create opportunities for tampering and also for money to being handed out.
Okay, well, if that is the case, and listen, I'm not conceding that the point that I just made. But let's just say that you're right and nobody wants to fall on the sword. Then I don't want to hear anybody else in college football, whether it be commissioner, whether it be a Hall of Fame worthy head coach, whether it be an active head coach, about we need regulation then. I don't want to hear it anymore. Like, I know that you say that you want it. But I do feel as if today was Kirby putting his foot down and saying enough is enough. Like that's how it comes off to me. And Joe, I got to be real with you. I don't agree if the Big Ten and the SEC came together and said, listen, listen, everything that you did in the past is fugazi. It's done. It's over with. You keep doing this shit, we're coming down on you. We're coming down on you. Because until real leadership happens, nothing will take hold. Leadership is doing something that nobody else wants to do when you know it's right and nobody else wants to do it. That is true leadership.
We're not going to get that. We're not going to get that true leadership.
Okay, well then
there's too many politics and manipulation.
Okay, so then don't tell me that you want it then. Stop going to the camera and telling me that you want this when it's all bullshit. Because it is all bullshit. Joe, do you really believe, and I'm just going to be dead ass honest, do you believe Tony Batiti, when Ohio State went out and got Caleb Downs, who will be number one on our list on top Big Ten players defensively, Do you really think Tony Petitti would go after Ohio State because they went and got Caleb Downs?
No, absolutely not.
Listen now. Kirby literally sent out a link to his own collective when Caleb Downs went to Ohio State. So he's not at fault. I mean, it's not like he's clean here either. I mean, let's just be open and honest. There was something that he said there, and he called out players. He goes, bro, I ain't never had an All-American player that money was all that they talked about, and they were worth a shit.
That was a really interesting point he brought up, by the way.
He was fed up today, bro. He was in his full Nick Saban rant. He went full mentor on our ass.
I think he was right for a lot of the framing of the situation that he put out there, and it was kind of funny that he went into his full Nick Saban mode, where Saban used to grandstand about the future of the sport and the direction of the sport and where things are turning and going towards. I think that there is, from what I read from Dan's article and what Kirby said today, they're just pointing out more issues and new issues that are not fixable. And I think that you bring up a point that they don't want to enforce the tampering that is there, because
no, they don't.
The ones that are doing it, it's every team, but more importantly, like, you're not going to take a shot at Ohio State when they're representing the conference winning national championships. You're not going to take a shot at Georgia or at Alabama because they're competing for the top of the conference.
And you know what else you're
in a battle. The problem is right now, Blake, is that you're in a battle with the other conferences.
Exactly.
So whatever helps your conference win and be the best, that is what the conferences are going to do. They're not going to allow it to happen.
As the great song once said, bingo, and bingo was his name-o. You're damn right. And you know why? You know what, too? You don't have auto bids with these four teams from the Big Ten and the SEC. So you know what? If I'm Greg Sankey and I'm saying, hey, LSU kind of went out there this year. Ole Miss kind of went out there this year and dominated the portal. I don't think I'm going to hit them. I don't think I'm going to regulate this shit, because what if I can get one of those teams into the playoff and get my conference more money? I'm not going to do it. Why would they do it? Why in the Sam hell would they do that? They're not going to do that. They're not going to do it. They won't do it because of money. That's what it all comes down to. They would never. Greg Sankey would never. Joe, listen, I am going to clip this shit and I am going to mark it down and I'm putting it up in my office. And on July the 15th or whatever the day is for SEC Media Days, Greg Sankey is going to go out to that podium and he's going to say, we need legislation for NIL in the transfer portal. And I'm going to come out back to this show today and say, Kirby Smart came out and said, agents are out here tampering for schools on a day in, day out basis, and you have the legal authority from your own conference to make something happen about it, and you won't do it.
Well, the only way that this is going to happen at the end of the day, I'm sorry, I completely reject this point of, and I understand why you're bringing it up, but I don't think that we're ever going to have Petitti or Sankey take action against one of the teams in his own conference. The only way that we get an actual movement forward is if a team in a weaker conference, a Big 12 team, an ACC team, whatever it is, that loses a player and reports him to the NCAA, and the NCAA is actually able to uphold and go through with the punishment for it. That is the only way that we take progress towards that. But the problem is right now is that the NCAA gets sued for everything that they do.
Well, let me ask you this question. With Kirby Smart's questions today, why can't the NCAA do something about it then?
Because they're afraid that they're going to get sued. They're in a holding pattern right now until things start to change. Now, if you want to tamper, now's the time to do it. That's why everybody's doing it.
I know it. You're right. You're basically what you're saying is, Blake, the reality is it won't happen. But my stance will be, you're right. The reality of it is it will not change and it will not happen. However, and with a massive all capitalized however, it doesn't mean that I got to continue for the fifth straight year. Here you go to a podium and talk shit about how we need legislation. Well, you won't do shit about it either. You've had 5 years to do. Joe, they've had half a decade. Half a decade. We've gone. Joe, think about this. My son, you know how old my son is. Think about this. When NIL was passed, my son just got born. Think about that for a moment. And
but I would argue though that like 5 years really actually isn't enough time for this to get developed. It's such a foreign concept that none of us know how to navigate it.
Well, they haven't. Name one thing that they've tried to do. Have they even come? Let me ask you this. Last question. I swear to God, we got to move on.
Okay.
Is there one thing that they've even tried to do? Name one thing that they've tried to do, like even an attempt.
The trying to put penalties on Tennessee for the flight with Nico, and then the courts got involved, and then that was the end of everything. That's the only example I can like really think of, and that is also an example.
That's not really tampering, but I get what you're saying.
Well, it's illegal recruiting. And then immediately the school went to court.
Out of the NCAA and won. Yeah.